Hello, what's up? Okay, so we are watching this stream, and I don't know if I'm doing this right, if I'm doing this wrong. It's 4 minutes left until the stream starts, and I have to look there because I am a bit confused. Don't know what's happening. We're gonna watch the PS5 unveiling. So I've been a huge fan of the PlayStation series in general. We've had the PS3, and I've also had the PS4. The PS4, the most recent. Unfortunately, no PS2, and the PS1. Well, I was a bit too young for that, so no PS1. But now we are on to the PS5, and we're just gonna see what happens. I mean, this is my first ever time doing a live stream, so that's pretty cool. Don't know what to talk about. I don't even know how to check if things are going well. I think if you click here, hey, hello. I think if you click here, it works. Not sure though. How do you remove this? Wait, I know what to do. What if I do that? What if I do that? Does that change it? Yes, it changes it. Okay. Bear with me while I learn how to do all of this. Starting in like 2 minutes. Subscribe. Okay, so it's starting in like 2 minutes, and we're just gonna see what happens. This is literally a very new experience for me. Don't know how it's gonna go. Don't even know if it's working properly. Wait, you can check. So if I do that, this is really cool. Okay. Hello. Hello. Oh yes, it works. Okay. Excellent. Dark mode. I do use dark mode on my phone, but it's not something I've enabled on my laptop or PC because I don't know, I just don't use YouTube that often on my PC to be bothered really. So there you go. I mean, I love dark mode, but it's just not something I use. Shaunak Chetan. Hello Shaunak. Kimche, what's up? So for the people who don't know, Shaunak is my cousin brother. He has a YouTube channel, so if you're interested in some of the things he does, go subscribe to him. But yeah, hi. Okay, let's see what happens if we refresh this, 'cause I really wanna not miss anything. There you go. Are you looking forward to the Xbox or the PlayStation? Because I think the Xbox was announced, or rather shown off maybe 2 or 3 days ago. So are you looking forward to that, or are you more of a PlayStation guy? Let me know that. Why is this not beginning? I don't know why. I'm confused as much as you are. So yeah, of course, if you do see these people on screen, so this guy right here is Pixel Plays or Abhishek, and he's Quasar. They're my friends who stream games. So if you want to go and, I don't know, follow them, subscribe to their channels, there it is. You can do that as well. But yeah, I mean, let me know what's happening, because this is really weird, kind of awkward, but I'm gonna go with it because like everyone's stranded at home, they have nothing to do right now, and I think the only thing you can do is to try new things. I don't know if I'm getting any messages. Nope, nothing. Oh, it's starting. There we go, it is starting. Let me check if the audio level is correct. the audio not working? Hello? Oh, it's too low. It's too low. Okay, wait. What if I do that? Hello? Can you hear me? I'm hearing. Excellent. See, this is what I don't like. How about if I do that? That? That doesn't seem to affect. Nice. Okay. What about if I do that? Excellent. Very, very cool. But I really wanna know. What if I do that? Hello. No. Okay. I'm so confused. Oh, wait. Is that what?
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the talk that we had.
Okay. What's happening?
We do have some super exciting news about PS5, and
Nice.
Once every 5 or 6 or 7 years, a console arrives with substantially new capabilities. There's a lot of learning by the game developers, hopefully not too overwhelming, and soon there's games that could never have been created before. Now, it used to be that as a console designer, you'd somehow intuit what would be the best set of capabilities for the new console, and then build it in complete secrecy. For the PlayStation consoles, that period lasted through PlayStation 3.
Okay,
A powerful,
I think we are up and running.
console, but also one that caused quite a lot of heartache, as it was initially difficult to develop games for. So,
Right.
starting with PlayStation 4, we've taken a different approach, roughly centered around 3 principles.
Did he just say PlayStation 4?
The first of these is listening to the developers,
he's
which is
talking
to
about
say
the
that
PlayStation
a
4.
lot of what we put into a console derives directly from the needs and aspirations of the game creators.
Okay.
We definitely do have some ideas of our own, but at the core of our philosophy for designing consoles is that game players are here for the fantastic, which is to say that game creators matter. Anything we can do to make life easier for the game creators or help them realize their dreams, we will do. So, about once every 2 years, I take a tour of the industry. I go to the various developers and publishers, sit down, and discuss how they're doing with the current consoles and what they'd like to see in future consoles. This requires weeks on the road, as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable.
Okay.
By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in the hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep dive on the SSD and surrounding systems later on in this talk.
Nice. So I think they're going to go for the same SSD
generationally,
as
while keeping the consoles
something we saw on the
familiar
Xbox.
to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution.
Okay.
Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this
So I've had
time
the
to
PlayStation
time.
3
Here's
and the
what I had
PlayStation
for
4.
those 3 consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to realize their vision. What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to 0, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it has, and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required learning back to PlayStation 1 levels. With
Nice,
PS5,
okay.
the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension
So basically,
between
they're
adding new features
letting us
and
know
keeping
about
a familiar
how the
program.
PS5 is gonna have.
Ultimately, I think we've
Even
ended
yeah,
up with
there we
something
go. So
under a
it's
month of
only
getting up to
a
speed.
month.
That feels like we're striking about the right balance. I'll go into a bit more detail later today
So that's
about our
impressive.
philosophy
It
with
sort
the
of
GPU
increased
and
until the
specific
PlayStation
feature
3,
set that resulted.
then dropped to the PlayStation 4,
It's
and
also
then went
very
to the
important for
PlayStation 5.
us
So
as
like,
the hardware
that's
team
pretty cool.
to find new dreams, by which I mean something other than CPU
But I swear he
performance,
said
GPU performance, and the amount
PS4
of
when
RAM.
he's supposed
The
to be
increase
discussing
in
the
graphics
PS5.
performance over
I
the
don't know.
past 2
I
decades
think
has
he
been
did say that.
astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate and provide significant value to the game creators, and through them, the players. That's why the SSD was very much on our list of directions to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category
SSD.
is the custom engine for audio. That's today's
A bigger
final
SSD.
topic.
Like
The push
the one, the
for
500
vastly
gigabyte
improved
SSD
audio,
is just too
and
small.
in particular, 3D audio isn't something that came out of the developer meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years from now, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the 3 principles, the first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers for PlayStation 5. As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it?
Of course you can.
That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in
Yeah,
on
it does
just
take a while
one
to load
number,
GTA 5.
which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard
There
drive.
we go.
The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds.
Okay.
If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression ratio. We support zlib decompression on PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data on the disc and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each. My rule of thumb is
really
that the
thought
hard
this would
drive
be
is
more
spending
interesting
2/3 of
than,
its time seeking,
like,
and only
a science
1/3
class.
of its time actually loading data. Putting all of that together, a gigabyte is very roughly 20 seconds to load from a hard drive. Now, a gigabyte is not much data. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game to load, wait for the level to reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel.
Sounds like how I play.
All of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD?
Wow.
If we could load 5 gigabytes a second from it, what would change?
I think they exceeded
Now,
the target.
SSDs are completely different from hard drives.
think they
don't have
exceeded the
seeks
target.
as such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD, you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that second, pretty much at speed. As for time to load a gigabyte, this is next gen we're talking about, so memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about 1/4 of a second. I mean, that's amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude,
Nice.
meaning
What's
very
this guy's name?
roughly
Does anyone know what
100
this guy's
times
name is?
faster. Which means at 5 gigabytes a second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload.
That's
You're
pretty cool,
immediately
though.
back in the action after you die. And fast travel becomes so fast it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to distract the player from how long fast travel is taking, like those Spider-Man subway rides, to being so blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right?
That's
but
what
for
they're
me,
going to do
this
when they
is
release
not
the PS6.
primary
They're just
reason
going to
to
slow
change from a
everything
hard
down
drive
and
to
make the
an SSD.
PS6 sound
The
even
primary
cooler.
reason for an ultra-fast SSD is that it gives the game designer freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have two rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets. Having a 30-second elevator ride is a little extreme. More realistically, we'd probably chop the world
This is
into
the stuff I'm
number
going to
of
listen to
smaller
when I
pieces,
want to go
and
to
then do
sleep
some
tonight.
calculations with sight lines and run speeds, like we did for Haven City when we were making Jack 2. The game is 20 years old, but not much has changed since then. All those twisty passages are there for a reason. There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still, it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte a second target was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right.
It's really cool that they're doing all of this.
Back to the hard drive.
From
Another
a
strategy
technical
for
point of
increasing
view,
effective read
it's
speed is to make
amazing
big
that they can do
sequential
it, but
chunks of
like
data.
from a
For
general
example, we might
consumer point of
group
view,
all
I
the data
don't
together
think
for each
anyone
city
really
block.
cares. So
That removes
they
most
should
of the
just
seeks,
move on to the
and
good
the streaming
stuff.
gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication.
Has anyone
as a
played
result.
Marvel Spider-Man?
Some of the objects like
Cousin
mailboxes
has.
or news racks
I
are on the
haven't.
hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design
Yeah, so
gets a
it
little
is.
bit
It
boring
is.
in
So
places, or
what they're
the data
describing
duplicated
is
so many
interesting.
times
It's
that it no
impressive.
longer fits on the Blu-ray
But
disc. And you
were
end up
they
with
supposed to
hard
say
limits
all
on
of that at the
player's
start?
run
Maybe they
speed
could
or
have
driving
revealed
speed. The player can't
the
go faster
console or
than
like the
load
more
speed.
interesting stuff that consumers sort of are interested
And
in.
finally, I'm sure
and
many
then
of
move
you
on
have
to this
noticed
stuff.
that after a patch
I
download,
don't know. I think that just
PlayStation 4
makes
will sometimes take a long
it more
time
engaging.
to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots
But it's
up,
fair.
a
I mean, like
brand
the
new file has to be constructed that
PS4
includes
right
the
now is
changed portion.
extremely slow
Otherwise,
to like
every change
load
would add
games,
a seek or two.
download,
Even
install,
so, you can
and all of that. So
occasionally see this
they're doing a
happening on
good
game
job, and
titles.
it's
They
been what
start to
7,
pitch
8
once they
years
get
since it's
patched.
been updated. So
With an SSD,
we
though,
are
no
sort of
seeks.
we
So
should have
no need to
expected
make
these
brand
updates
new
in the
files
first
with the
place
changes
because it's been a
incorporated,
while since
which
the
means
PS4 has
no
been around.
installs as
I
we
think.
know them today.
Has it been like 7 years, 8 years?
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently.
I don't know.
On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds.
I really
or
don't
so
know how
of the
there's
game.
27
That means
people
a lot of the 8
watching this, to
gigabytes
be
of
honest.
system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from the SSD and use it. There's no need to have lots of data parked in system memory waiting to potentially be used. A different way of saying that is that most of RAM is working on the game's behalf. This is one of the reasons that 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 feels right for PlayStation 5. The presence of the SSD reduces the need for a massive intergenerational increase in size. So back to the dream of the SSD.
I think that was
Here's the
expected.
set of targets.
GDDR6.
Put the game in a second. No load
I
screens.
think PCs
Design
sort of have
freedom,
it.
meaning no twisty passages
So
or long
yeah,
corridors.
expected.
More
And
game on the disk and more game
it's
on
good
the
that it
SSD.
has it, because
And
this
finally,
thing's gonna
those
pretty
patch
much
installs
be in
go
the market for the next 5-7
The
years.
reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the speed of a standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster.
Real
It was
world.
that game loads and streaming.
How does that work though? So when that was 10
faster.
times,
so every
this was
single
2
potential
times.
bottleneck needed to be addressed.
But when this is 100
and there are
times,
a lot of them.
this is also 100
Let's
times.
look at check-in and what happens
Doesn't
when
make
its
sense.
overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard
Shouldn't
drive
it be
or
20
SSD.
times?
It's examined.
I don't know.
A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part, moving the data, meaning copying it from one location to another, takes roughly an entire
What are the odds
next-gen
that this
CPU
guy is
core.
just
And
reading
that's
off a
just the tip of
teleprompter?
the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger, that will cripple the frame rate as soon as the player moves, and that massive stream of data starts coming off the SSD. So to solve all of that, we built a lot of custom hardware, namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip. The flash controller in the SSD was designed for smooth and bottleneck-free operation. but
Imagine
also
he's like,
with
whoever's
games
paying
input. For
attention
example,
gets
there
a
are
free
6 levels
PS5.
of
So what did I
priority
say
reading on
at
the SSD.
13
Priority is
minutes
very
and 32
important.
seconds
You can imagine the player
about the
heading into
SSD
some
on
new
the
location
PS5?
in the world and the game requesting a few gigabytes of textures. And while those textures are being loaded, an enemy is shot and has to speak a few dying words. Having multiple priority levels lets the audio for those dying words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach
I
our
could've just skipped
bandwidth
this.
target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but Flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of
I'm
the weekend or the
glad
week
I don't know
month,
Arabic.
and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or re-downloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that
Oh, nice.
825
You've gone to
gigabyte
school.
size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add
You
it.
can
I'll
leave.
go through the details in a moment. Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O.
This guy is pretty
Before
much
we talk about what
describing
that does, let's talk
a
compression
computer.
for a moment. PlayStation 4 used zlib as its compression format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the UHD Blu-ray disc or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were either using it or getting ready to evaluate it. So we hustled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself
this
is
guy's gonna
capable
bore
of
me to
outputting
death.
as much as 22 gigabytes a second if the data happened to compress particularly well. By the way, in terms of performance, that custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional CPU. There's a lot more in the custom I/O unit, including a dedicated DMA controller. The game can direct exactly where it wants to send the data coming off of the SSD. This equates to another Zen 2 core or 2 in terms of its copy performance. Its primary purpose is to remove check-in as a bottleneck. There's 2 dedicated I/O coprocessors and a large RAM pool. These aren't Zen 2 cores. They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware.
To be honest, I don't even know what's happening.
One of the coprocessors is dedicated to SSD I/O. This lets us bypass traditional file I/O and its bottlenecks when reading from the SSD. The other is responsible for memory mapping, which I know doesn't sound like anything related to the SSD, but a lot of developers map and remap memory as part of file I/O, and this too can become a bottleneck. There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors. Coherency comes up a lot in places. Probably the biggest coherency issue is stale data in the GPU caches. Flushing all of the GPU caches whenever the SSD is read is an unattractive option. It could really hurt the GPU performance. So we've implemented a gentler way of doing things, where the coherency engines inform the GPU of
Does
the
anyone
overwritten
watching
address
know what's
ranges,
going on?
and custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches do pinpoint evictions of just
You know
those
what?
address ranges. The best thing is, as a game developer, when you read from the SSD, you don't need to know any of this. You don't even need to know that your data is compressed. You just indicate what data you'd like to read from your original uncompressed file and where you'd like to put it, and the whole process of loading it happens
Shaunak.
invisibly to you and at very
Okay.
high speed. Back to the dream. Thanks to all of that surrounding hardware, our 5.5 gigabytes a second really should translate into something like 100 times faster I/O than PS4, and allow the dream of no load screens and super fast streaming to become a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash is costly, and you may very well want to add storage to whatever we put in your console. Now, the kind of storage you need depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library and you'd like to take advantage of backwards compatibility to play those games on PlayStation 5, then a large external hard drive is ideal. You can leave your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, thus saving the pricier SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to the SSD. If your purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage.
Joel, don't say that.
We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs. These are internal drives that you can get on the open market and install in a bay.
It's very fun to watch.
As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit just like our SSD does, so they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the catch, though. That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time, commercial M2 drives used PCIe 3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other words, no PCIe 3.0 drive can hit the required spec. M2 drives with PCIe 4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting our samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can use. And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drive supports 6. We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels, definitely, but our custom I/O unit has to arbitrate the extra priorities rather than the M2 drive's flash controller. And so the M2 drive needs a little extra speed to take care of issues arising from the different approach. That commercial drive also needs to physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives.
What's his name?
Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately
Walaikum
no
assalam.
standard for the height
That's
of an
right.
M2 drive. And some M2 drives have giant heat sinks. In fact, some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive samples and benchmarking them in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU. We need new GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before. And we need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced. But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as a key need throughout the design process. As our solution to adding new features without blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them. The GPU supports ray tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU based on their RDNA 2 technology. What does that mean? AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech. For RDNA 2, their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into
Yes,
RDNA
Yuvraj,
2 and used
we've
broadly,
been waiting
including
for that
PC
for the past 32
GPUs.
minutes.
If the ideas are sufficiently specific to what we're trying
I
to
don't think
accomplish,
they'll be
like the
denied the
GPU
league.
cache
I
scrubbers
just
I was
think
talking about,
it's going to
then
get
they end
delayed,
up being just for us.
depending on
If you
when
see
this whole
a similar
situation
discrete
of
GPU available as
staying
a
at
PC
home
card
clears
at
up.
roughly the same time as we release our console,
Hope it's
that
soon, though.
means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's
I don't think it's going to
dangerous
return
rely
on
teraflops as an
April
absolute
3rd. I
indicator
think
of
it's too
performance.
early.
And CU count should
And
be avoided
the
as well.
count for
In the case of CPUs,
COVID
we
is
all understand
going up
this.
every
The
day, so it's
PlayStation
just like,
4 and PlayStation
kind of
5
depressing,
each have
to be
8
honest.
CPUs, but we never think that meant the capabilities and performance are equal. It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors.
PS4
In fact,
flop.
the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4.
So
Second,
I
the
think it's
PlayStation
because I
5
don't have my
GPU is
audio levels
backwards
set up
compatible with
properly.
PlayStation 4.
Like to
What does
imagine
mean?
that.
One way you can achieve backwards
I'm
compatibility
sorry,
is
Edward.
to put the previous console's chipset in
Yeah,
the
I'm not
new
going to use it
console, like we
until
did
this
with
thing
some
finishes,
PlayStation
hopefully.
3s. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chip.
They're smart.
Meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's
you're
in.
right.
It's not
I hope
as if
it's
a cost down
done
will
soon, though.
remove backwards compatibility like it did on PlayStation 3. Achieving
What
this
MacBook do you
unification
have?
of
Is it an
functionality
old
took
one?
years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis.
How's this guy
Results
not tired?
are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5. With regards to new
There's
features,
no
as I
backward
said, our
compatibility
strategy
for
was to try to break
PS3
new ground,
or 2.
but at the same time not to require use of the new GPU capabilities. For more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines. Software handles vertex processing,
that's
but
not a
for
bad
the most
laptop.
part,
It's
dedicated
just
hardware is responsible for the
the
triangles
keyboard
and
could
other
be better.
geometry that the vertices form. That means it's not possible to do even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine,
Are you going to
which
buy
brings
the new
handling
one?
of triangles
The
and
29
other primitives under
2020
full programmatic
16
control.
inch.
As a game developer,
So
you're
I actually
free
used
to
the
ignore its
16 inch for 2
existence
weeks.
and use the PlayStation
I wrote a
5
review on
GPU
it
as if it were no
on
other
Tech Radar.
from the
You can go check it out if you
GPU.
want.
Or
But
you can use
yeah,
this
it's a
new
pretty cool
intelligence
laptop.
in various
Much better than the
ways.
one I'm using right now.
Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing backfaced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered. It's a brand new capability. Using
So at this
primitive
stage,
shaders
like,
on PlayStation 5
how
will
many
allow
of the
for
actual
a broad
people
variety
are
of techniques, including smoothly varying
still
level of
listening
detail,
keenly?
addition of procedural detail to close-up objects, and improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs. The CUs contain a new specialized
Yeah,
unit called
so
the intersection
he's
engine,
supposed to
which can
make it
calculate
just
the
a bit more
intersection of
engaging,
rays with
but I don't think
boxes
he
and
knows that.
To use the intersection engine,
Or
first you
or
build what is
what
called
if
an
what if these
acceleration
people are all just
source. It's
fake?
data in RAM that
They're
contains
just like
all of the
silhouettes
geometry.
they've added to
There's a
make sure this is
specific set of
engaging, and
formats
there's
you
no
can
one in the
use. There are
crowd
variations
because
on the
no one
same
can actually
game
attend because
concept.
of the whole virus
Then,
thing.
in your shader program,
Conspiracy
you
theory,
use a
maybe.
new instruction that asks the intersection engine to
Because I
check
don't
a
really
ray
see them
against
moving.
the BB
Oh,
gauge.
okay, that guy
While the
moved.
intersection
Maybe
engine
not.
is
Maybe not.
processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections,
I'm sure he's
the
reading off a
shaders are free
teleprompter
to
or
do
something,
other
to be
work.
honest.
Having said that, the ray tracing
I have
instruction is
got,
pretty memory intensive, so it's a good
probably
mix with logic-heavy code.
30.
There's of course no
phones,
need
30,
to use ray
35.
tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion
30.
and some reverb calculations. With a bit
30
more of the
phones.
GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to
I'm
a
just
traditional graphics
hyped that I
engine
can
could
live
easily
stream
take
this, to be
hundreds
honest.
of millions of rays
This
a
is my
second,
first time
and
in
full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go?
PR.
I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's
What
a
do you
cost
mean
for
by
whatever
PR?
we use to supply that chip with power and
PFR.
in general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's 2 possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you
I
get
think
the same
this
number.
is the most
But
boring
actually,
thing
the
I've ever
performance
watched.
is noticeably different because teraflops is defined as
This
the
thing
computational
beats the
capability of the vector
PS5 logo reveal.
That's
I
just
think.
one part of the
That's
GPU.
how underwhelming
There
this
are
is.
a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher. At 33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher bandwidth, and so on. About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae of what's being displayed and how. It's counterintuitive, but processing dense geometry typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry, which is, I suspect, why Horizon's map screen, with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat up so much. Our process on previous consoles has been to try to guess what the maximum power consumption during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be quiet at that power level. If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance that it might overheat and shut down if we misestimate power too badly. PlayStation 5 is especially challenging because the CPU supports 256-bit native instructions that consume a lot of power. These are great here and there, but presumably only minimally used. Or are they? If we plan for major 256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size
I wouldn't be
of the power
surprised.
supply and fan.
I really would not be surprised.
So, after much discussion,
The
we
way
decided
his
to go
gaze
in a very different
is
direction on PlayStation.
exactly 90
We
degrees
built
or
a GPU with
exactly in
36
front,
CUs. Mind you,
unfazed,
RDNA2 CUs
no
are
emotions,
large. Each has 62%
same
more
stance
transistors
for
than
the
CUs
entire,
we were using on PlayStation 4.
I don't know how many,
So, if we
35
compare
minutes
transistor
this has
counts,
been going on.
36 RDNA2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly
What do you think the
sizable
odds
GPU.
on
Then
all of these
we went
people
with a
understanding
variable
what he's
frequency
saying
strategy
are?
for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm.
I'm
Rather
just
than
laughing
running
at
at
his
constant frequency
face,
and letting power vary
which is
based on
not
the
something you
workload,
should do.
we
but
run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackle the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and
Hey, what's
high-performance
up?
cooling solution designed for that specific power level.
Are you waiting for
In
the
some ways,
PS5
it
too?
becomes a
Yeah.
simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details,
I can
of the
see him
cooling
playing like
solution, we're
Sims
saving
3 or
them for
something
our
like that.
teardown. I think you'll be
Or
quite
like
happy with what the
Club
engineering
Penguin.
team came up
I
with.
think that game's gone, right?
So,
But I
how
can still
fast
see him play
can we
that.
run the GPU and CPU with this strategy? The simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of the silicon die and throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work. It fails to create a consistent PlayStation 5 experience. It wouldn't do to run a console slower simply because it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes
Yes,
everything
Tetris.
deterministic and repeatable.
That's a good one too.
While we're at it, we also use AMD's Smart Shift technology and send any unused power from the CPU to the GPU so it can squeeze out a few more pixels.
Have you seen me like slowly
Benefits of
slouching
this strategy
downwards?
are quite large.
Because I'm just
Running a
losing
GPU
the
at
will
2
to listen to
gigahertz
this
was
guy.
looking like an unreachable target with the old fixed frequency strategy. With this new paradigm, we're able to run way over that. In fact, we have to cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 gigahertz so that we can guarantee that the on-chip logic operates properly. 36 CUs
I mean,
at 2.23
they did say it was a
gigahertz is
deep dive
10.3
into the
terabytes.
PS5. It's just
And
a
we
very
expect the GPU to spend
deep
most
dive.
of its time at or close to
Too deep.
that frequency and performance. Similarly, running the CPU at 3 gigahertz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5 gigahertz. In fact, it spends most of its time at that frequency. That doesn't mean all games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst-case game arrives, it will run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes
as
a
deep
couple of
as
percent
the
reduction in
Mariana
frequency. So I'd
Trench.
expect
Mariana
any
Trench.
downclocking to be
Isn't that like the deepest place in the world?
all things considered, the change
That's
to
how
the
deep he's
variable
going.
frequency approach will show significant gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about finding
Bro, he's
new
not
dreams.
done yet.
It's important for
He's
us
not
on
done.
the hardware team to find new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio. As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of course, important, but the impact of audio is huge as well. At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to do a lot with a little. For example, on PlayStation 4, there's fierce
Aren't we
competition
waiting
for
for
the
like
Jaguar CPU cores. Audio
Last of Us
typically
2 on
ends
the
up getting just a fraction
PS4?
of a core. That's
That
not
never came
much
out,
of
right?
a computational resource.
So now it's
particularly
probably
when
going to
you
come out on the
consider that
PS5 at the
visuals
end of the
run
year.
at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost a perfect device for audio rendering. Simple pipelined algorithms could really take advantage of asynchronous DMA and frequently reached 100% utilization of the floating point
You
unit.
made a mistake,
There's
King
unfortunately
Milk.
nothing
Like,
comparable on
I'm
PlayStation.
sure this thing doesn't come out until a few months.
Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio.
Will they do a price reveal?
Supports
I
about
don't
50
think they'll do a
pretty
price
decent
reveal.
3D sound sources. And this
The way
provides
they're
a hint
going,
as to where we
I
could go
don't
with
think they're
audio,
going to
as
reveal
well
the
as some
console.
valuable
They're just going to
insights.
say all of this and then be like,
Not to oversimplify,
we're
but
gonna
here
show you the
were our
console in a
goals
few
for
weeks
audio
or
on
a few
PlayStation
months.
5. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR users or soundbar owners or
How
headphone
much would you have to
users.
pay
That
for
meant
it
audio
to
had to be
stop?
part of the console. It couldn't be
Um,
peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of
know.
sound sources. We didn't
Really
want
don't know.
developers to have to pick and choose what sounds would get through
But
the
this
effects
guy is-
and which wouldn't. We wanted every sound in
He's
the
the
game
worst
to have
guy to do a reveal
dimensionality.
ever. Yes,
And
my
finally,
second
we
channel is
wanted to
hashtag
really
GN
take
Tech.
on the challenges
That's
of
where I do all
presence
my tech reviews,
and locality.
if you guys are
Now,
interested.
when we say presence, we mean the feeling that you're actually there. You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve. The idea was that if we stopped using just a rain sound
No console
and
review,
instead
that's
used
52.
lots of 3D audio
Yeah,
sources for
52
raindrops
minutes
hitting the
wasted,
ground
but at
and
least I
all
learned
sorts
how
of
to live
locations
stream.
around you, then at some point your brain would take a leap and you'd begin to have this feeling.
Right,
This
that makes
feeling
sense.
of real
Okay.
presence inside the virtual world.
You
of
could
the
have
game.
waited a few more
This has the capacity to
weeks, I
affect
think,
your
or even
appreciation of the
a
game,
few more months actually.
just like music
before you
in a
sell
game
it.
does. The concept of locality is simpler. It's just your sense of where the audio is coming from, to the right of you, behind you, above you. This can immerse you further in the game, and it can also directly enhance the gameplay.
This guy
To
is
use Dead
immersing me
Space
into
as an example, I know, old
Dead
school.
Space.
You're fighting enemies in fairly dark, spooky locations. Back in the day, if you played the game using the TV speakers, you could tell that there was one last enemy growling and hunting you down, but it was difficult to tell quite where that enemy was. With headphones, you could tell that the enemy was somewhere on the right, which let you deduce, if you couldn't see it, that it must be somewhere behind and to your right. But with 3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there, and you turn and
There,
you take it.
right on screen. The guy who's speaking, that's the enemy.
How do we know where a sound is coming from in the first place? Well, all those bumps and folds in the ear have a meaning, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is coming from, sound waves bounce around inside the ear, there's some constructive and destructive interference, and the result is a change in volume. The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path
don't even
the
think
sound
we're
wave
gonna
took
see the
to reach
PS5.
ear canal. These volume changes and phase shifts are different for each direction and also vary depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes based on direction and frequency
I
can
really
be
don't know.
encoded in a
So the
table called the
PS3
head-related
versus
transfer
the
function,
Xbox
or
debate, I think the
HRTF.
Xbox won
Here's
that.
part of one.
PS4
The vertical
definitely
axis
won
is the frequency.
against
The
whatever
horizontal
Xboxes
axis
came
is
out.
the
This
direction,
year,
front, back, left,
I'm
right,
not
and the
sure.
color
I
gives
mean,
the degree of attenuation of the sound.
if this guy is marketing the PS5,
HRTF
the Xbox
is
will
as
beat the
unique
PS5.
to an
But I'm
individual
pretty sure they
as a
have better
fingerprint
people.
is. In fact, you're looking at mine right now. Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the subject's left and right ear canals, and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22
This guy.
We then play an
I'm
audio
pretty sure this
sweep
guy is
from each
listening
speaker
to
as
his
we rotate
speech.
the subject.
Look at his face.
In the course of 10 or 20 minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000 locations. Using an HRTF when rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 locations we sample. Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency domain rather than time domain, so there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for every sound source for every audio tick. That's a lot of multiplies.
This is something I learned
This
in maths.
computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had to bite the bullet and design and build a custom hardware unit for 3D audio. Collectively, we're referring to the hardware unit and
Yes,
proprietary
they should have let
algorithms we
Siri
run
do
on
this.
as
And
Tempest.
Edward, they're preparing
The meaning of
for
3D
the
audio and technology should be pretty obvious
inevitable
here. As for Tempest, I
doomsday.
feel it really reflects our goals with audio.
So they
It
need
suggests
that
a
kind of
certain
toilet.
intensity of experience and also hints at your presence within it. We're calling the hardware unit that we built the Tempest engine. It's based on AMD's GPU technology. We modified a compute unit in such a way as to make it very close to the SPUs in PlayStation 3. Remember when I said that they were ideal for audio? So the Tempest engine has no caches, just like an SPU. All data access is via DMA, just like an SPU. Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU, thanks to the parallelism that a GPU can achieve, and that it would be more efficient than our GPU, thanks to the SPU-like architecture.
Hello.
The goal being to make
SA.
possible near
What's up?
100% utilization of the CU's vector
Are you
units.
here to see the
Where we ended
PS5
up
too?
is a unit
Yeah,
with roughly the
me
same
too.
SIMD power and bandwidth as all 8 Jaguar cores in the PlayStation 4 combined. If we were to use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for something like 5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like that number of sounds. It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could
I'm
have
fine.
achieved our
Thank
goals,
you
but
for
we
asking.
wanted 3D audio
Where are you
for
guys
all,
from, by the way?
not just
Like-
those with licensed soundbars or the like. Also, we wanted many hundreds of sound sources, not just the 32 that Atmos supports.
Okay.
And finally, we wanted to be able to throw an overwhelming amount of processing power at the problem, and it wasn't clear what any peripheral might have inside of it.
No
In fact,
way.
with the Tempest engine,
Really?
we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games,
Bahamas.
to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other algorithms that are either computationally expensive or need high bandwidth. But the primary purpose of the Tempest engine remains 3D audio.
That's pretty cool.
Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented,
nice.
tuned, or implemented to realize
Singapore.
our vision for 3D
I've
audio
been to
is
Singapore.
immense. For
I'd
example,
say
use of HRTFs
8
in
years ago,
games is quite
when
complex.
the Marina Bay Sands
Before, I talked
wasn't
about
open.
making a sound
So
source
it was almost
appear as
complete.
if it's coming
Do you live
from
nearby?
one of
Do you
those
live near
1,000
downtown, or
HRTF
is
sample
there another
locations.
Singapore
But
place?
for high quality 3D
Oh, did it?
audio, we have to
Um,
handle other possibilities.
I've been hearing
The
many
sound source
countries are
might not
getting
be
shut
at one
down,
of the 1,000
mostly in
HRTF
Europe. Though.
sample
Didn't hear about
locations.
the
So we have to
Bahamas.
blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving,
Right?
which needs very special
Yeah,
handling.
this
as
guy,
that
I don't know
blend
what he's
keeps
doing.
changing, and
He's
that can
teaching
cause
me
phase
basically my
artifacts in the resulting audio.
electronics portion of my
Or the
engineering
sound source
degree.
might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources, but alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics. And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches.
Oh,
That's a lot
so
of
it's reached the
variations.
Bahamas as well.
It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our ultimate goals with 3D audio is going to be a multi-year, step-by-step process.
This guy's the most boring
Having
person
said
I've
that,
seen.
headphone audio
honest.
implementation is largely complete at this time. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore
How's
the
the
algorithmic
situation in
development and
Singapore,
implementation
Joel?
are more straightforward.
Um,
For
Are they,
TV
like, going in
speakers
lockdown,
and stereo
or-
speakers, we're in the
Hi,
process
Shoaib.
of
What's
implementing
up?
virtual surround sound. The idea being that if you're sitting in a sweet spot in front of the TV,
I'm pretty convinced
then
these
the
people
sound
are not
is
even
made to
real.
feel as if it's coming from any
They-
direction,
This
even
the
though
only guy that's moving is the guy in front of me.
virtual
and
surround sound has a
don't think
lot
it's
in
real.
common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because
It's a PS5.
the left ear can hear
It's
the
the
right
PS5.
speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing
Bro,
the size of that sweet spot.
I've sat
which is
here
to
for
say,
55
making the area
minutes
you need
watching
to
this
be
guy
in to
give me a
feel the
lecture on
3D effect
electronics.
larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the
Yes,
current
I've
gold
been in
standard
that
for
class
3D
for the
audio on
past
PlayStation 5, but
55
we're going to
minutes
see
or
what
50
we can do
minutes.
to bring virtual surround
This
sound
guy
to
is
a similar
useless.
level, after which we'll start in on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound. It's now to the point where some of the PlayStation 5 games in development are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between
How many cases in
conventional
Singapore?
PlayStation 4
Is
style
it
stereo
a lot?
audio and
I
our
haven't
new
heard of
3D
Singapore in the
audio.
news. I'm pretty sure
I
it's
listened
less.
with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones.
It's just funny
Wow,
watching this
I
guy's
could feel a
face.
difference.
Like, this
3D
guy
audio
has been
has that
talking for the
dimensional
last
feel to it.
55 minutes
Conventional
without doing
stereo audio
anything
feels
different.
smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered
I
the
know
matrix?
like
Does my
10%
brain
of what he
believe
said,
I'm really
not
there?
90%.
Like I was talking about earlier when I
This
explained
guy
our
is worse
target
than
in the present.
literally
Well,
the virus.
the answer is no, but you've probably caught on to what's missing here, namely whose HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the
313.
one they felt was the closest fit to the total game playing audience.
Okay,
This shows
that's
a
a lot.
piece of the default HRTF on the
So
left.
here in Dubai,
My HRTF
I think there's
on the
like
right. You can see that the
100
general
and
features
something,
are much the
150
same,
cases.
but the details
ish.
are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said, the 3D audio
His
sounds
favorite
pretty
game
great.
is Club Penguin.
When I use
That's
my
what he
HRTF,
uses his
though,
PS5
the audio
for.
reaches a higher level of realism, which is to say that when using headphones and my HRTF, I occasionally get fooled and even think a sound is coming from the real world when it's actually coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here,
Yeah.
that they can toggle
I can't
between
wait until
PS4
one of your
style and
friends makes a
PS5
sticker
style
on him
audio
using
and
his
not
face.
sense much
Do it.
difference.
You make
I had
it, actually.
a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like a bit better stereo
I
audio.
cannot show
Presumably they're
sorry,
the ones
I
at the
cannot
very edges
SA.
of this divide.
I can read it. I sort of
Which
understand a
means
bit, but I
what
cannot speak
HRTF
it.
you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing.
man has
but
a Vaio
obviously
laptop
it's
to
not
tell the
possible
time.
to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures. At PlayStation 5 launch, we'll be offering a choice of 5 HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives you the best locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended
Carl,
research
I
topic.
wish he just
Maybe you'll be
unveiled
sending
all
us
of this in
photo
a
of your
more
ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick
consumer-centric
the
way.
closest HRTF
Because
for
I'm
audio.
sure, like, some of the
Maybe
things
you'll
when
be
he was
sending us a
announcing
video
them is
of your
pretty
ears and your head,
interesting
and we'll
to
make a
see,
3D
but it's
model
just
of them and
that
synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play
he's
an
so
audio
boring.
game to tune
He's
your
supposed to
HRTF.
have like
We'll
some
be
sort of
subtly
personality.
changing it
He's
as you
supposed
play,
to
and hone
attract
in on the HRTF
the live
that gives
stream
you the
audience.
highest
and
score,
he's
meaning
doing
that it
nothing.
matches you
He's pretty
the
much doing
best.
none of that.
This is
Walaikum
a
assalam,
journey we'll all be
SA.
taking
So yes,
together
I do
over the next few
understand.
years.
I can read.
Ultimately, we're committing to
And
enabling
yeah, but
everyone
very
to
basic.
experience that next level of realism. Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and decision-making process today, and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the
I hope he calls
completely
someone else on
unexpected.
stage.
Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you
Oh,
for your
he's
time
done.
today.
That's it. GG boys. We just tuned in to watch nothing. We got a game and a meme out of it, and that's about it. This is literally me right now. Okay, we're not gonna watch this. Thank you for watching. Check out this guy. Why don't you go to this guy? Actually, whoever's watching, go to this guy's stream. I'm gonna put his link in the chat. And go say that KCVP 11
लास्ट
70.
बंदा था माय गॉड
Try it out. I don't know how many people are actually going to go on it. If you're interested in Call of Duty Warzone, go check him out. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye. Take care. See you later.
शील्ड का पड़ा इसे अरे आरपीजी मार दिया इसने